the family Christmas where my mother-in-law announced how she was dividing the estate, she smiled around the table and said, "It's been decided. Everything goes to Ashley and her children. Sylvie's kids are lovely, of course, but they're not really Whitmores the way Ashley's are." My children, 11 and 9, heard every word, and I set down my glass and said, "That's interesting, Deanne, because Grandpa told me something different before he died, and he put it in writing where you can't reach it. Let me back up. My name is Sylvie Whitmore. I'm 41 years old, and my mother-in-law spent years positioning to disinherit my 2 children in favor of her golden grandchild, to write my kids out of the family as though they didn't count, and to do it to their faces. She very nearly did it. The only reason she failed is that her own late husband, a man everyone underestimated including his wife, had seen exactly this coming and quietly built a wall around my children that Deanne could not climb. Let me tell you about the Whitmores. The Whitmores were an old, proud, moneyed family, and Deanne Whitmore was its reigning matriarch, a woman for whom bloodline, status, and appearances were close to religion. Her husband, my father-in-law, was a man named Arthur, and Arthur was the source of the family's wealth, and it turned out, the only member of it with a genuinely good heart. Arthur had built the fortune through decades of work, and he'd married Deanne, who had spent the decades since deciding who in the family was worthy of it. There were 2 branches of grandchildren. My husband Daniel's children, my kids, Emma and Ben, and his sister Ashley's children. And from the beginning, Deanne had made her preference brutally clear. Ashley had married well into family Deanne approved of. Ashley's children were, in Deanne's eyes, the true continuation of the Whitmore line. My husband Daniel had married me, a woman from an ordinary background, a nobody by Deanne's standards, and our children were, therefore, lesser, diluted, not really Whitmores. She never hid it. That was almost the worst part. Ashley's children got the lavish attention, the extravagant gifts, the pride. My children got a cooler, more measured version, and they were old enough by the time this came to a head to feel the difference. Emma, my daughter, asked me once, at 8 years old, "Mommy, why doesn't Grandma Deanne like us as much as she likes Ashley's kids?" And I had to find something to say to my 8-year-old that wasn't the true answer, which was, "'Cause a cruel old woman has decided your blood isn't good enough." Arthur saw all of it. Arthur, quiet Arthur, who let Deanne run the family's social world because it wasn't worth the fight, saw exactly how his wife treated our children versus Ashley's. And Arthur loved all his grandchildren equally, fiercely, in the understated way of a man who didn't make speeches. He was the one who treated Emma and Ben as fully his, who lit up when they visited, who never once made them feel like the lesser branch. To Arthur, they were all his grandchildren, full stop. Arthur died when Emma was 9 and Ben was 7. And with him gone, Deanne's favoritism, no longer tempered by Arthur's quiet decency, curdled into something colder. A plan. Here's how it unfolded. After Arthur's death, Deanne took full control of the family's wealth and its future, and she began, openly, to restructure everything around her preferences. The estate, a very large one, the accumulated Whitmore fortune, would go, she made increasingly clear, to Ashley and Ashley's children. My kids were to be given a token, or nothing, because they weren't real Whitmores. Deanne spoke of it as though it were simply the natural order, the worthy line inheriting, the deluded line politely excluded. And she did it with a cruelty that went beyond money. She began to exclude my children in ways designed to teach them their place, leaving them out of the family photos that included only Ashley's kids, giving them noticeably lesser gifts, and letting them see the comparison, referring to Ashley's children as the heirs in front of mine. She was not just planning to disinherit my children. She was grooming them, and everyone around them, to understand that they were second class, so that when the disinheritance came, it would seem like the confirmation of a truth everyone already knew. I fought it where I could. I protected my kids from the worst of it. I built their sense of worth at home. I limited exposure to Deanne. But I couldn't fight the fundamental thing, which was that Deanne controlled the money and had decided my children weren't worthy of it. Or so I believed. Because there was something I didn't know, something Arthur had done, that would take Deanne's own Christmas announcement to bring into the light. Here's what I didn't know. Arthur, quiet Arthur, had not been as passive as everyone assumed. In the years before he died, he had watched his wife's favoritism harden, and he had understood better than anyone, because he'd lived with Diane for 50 years, exactly what she would do once he was gone. He knew she would try to disinherit Daniel's children. He knew she would frame it as bloodline and worthiness, and he knew that if he simply left everything to Diane, as was expected, she would have the power to write our children out entirely. So Arthur, without fanfare, had done something. He had taken a substantial portion of his own wealth, his own, separate from the marital estate Diane controlled, and before he died, placed it into a trust for all of his grandchildren, equally. Every one of them, named individually, Ashley's children and my children alike, in equal shares with an independent trustee, not Deanne, never Deanne, controlling it. Arthur had carved out a piece of the fortune, put it beyond his wife's reach, and divided it with perfect equality among all the grandchildren he loved, specifically so that no matter what Deanne did with the rest, my children could never be written out of everything. They would always have their equal share of Grandpa's love, made concrete, protected by law, untouchable by the woman who thought they weren't worthy. He had told me about it, once. Quietly near the end, in a way I hadn't fully absorbed at the time because I was focused on losing him. He'd taken my hand and said, "Sylvie, I've made sure Emma and Ben are taken care of, properly, equally." "Deanne can't touch it," I set it up so she can't. "If she ever tries to tell you they've been cut out, you remember, Grandpa already made sure. It's with a trustee named Coleman. Everything's with Coleman." I nodded through my grief and half filed it away, the way you do with a dying man's words when you're not ready for him to be dying. But I remembered. And after he was gone and Diane's plan became clear, I contacted the trustee, Mr. Coleman, and confirmed that everything Arthur had told me was true. The trust existed. It was airtight. My children each had an equal protected share of their grandfather's fortune, and Diane had no power over a dollar of it. I held that knowledge quietly for a long time. Because Diane didn't know that I knew. She was operating as though she controlled my children's entire future, and I let her think it, and I waited for the moment she'd make her cruelty public, so that the truth could meet it in front of everyone. She gave me that moment at Christmas. The whole family was there. And Diane, in her element, decided that Christmas dinner was the occasion to formally announce the division of the estate, to make official, in front of everyone, the disinheritance of my children. She smiled around the table and said, "It's been decided. Everything goes to Ashley and her children. Sylvie's kids are lovely, of course, but they're not really Whitmores the way Ashley's are." My children heard it. Emma, 11 now, and Ben, 9. They heard their grandmother tell a room full of family that they weren't real Whitmores, that they'd been cut out, that they didn't count. I watched Emma's face crumple, and something in me that had absorbed years of Diane's cruelty for my children's sake reached its absolute end. And I set down my glass. "That's interesting, Diane," I said, "because Grandpa told me something different before he died, and he put it in writing where you can't reach it." Diane's smile flickered. "I don't know what you think you." "Before Arthur died," I said to the whole table, "he set up a separate trust with his own money outside the estate you control, for all of his grandchildren. Equally. Every single one of them named individually, Ashley's children and my children, in exactly equal shares. With an independent trustee, a man named Coleman, who I've spoken with, and who has confirmed all of it. Arthur did this specifically because he knew, Diane. He knew you'd try to do exactly what you just did. He knew you'd stand up one day and tell his grandchildren that some of them weren't real Whitmores. So he made sure that no matter what you decided, Emma and Ben would always have their equal share of their grandfather's fortune, and you would never ever be able to touch it." The table had gone silent. Ashley was staring at her mother. "You can divide your share however you like," I continued. "That's your right, and if you want to write my children out of your portion because you've decided their blood isn't good enough, then that tells everyone exactly who you are, and my kids are better off without a dollar that came with that much contempt. But Arthur, the man who actually built this family's fortune, already made sure my children have their equal place in it. He did it quietly, years ago, because he loved them exactly as much as he loved Ashley's kids, and he didn't trust you not to teach them otherwise. He was right not to trust you. You just proved it in front of everyone to their faces on Christmas." Then I turned to my children, and I said the thing that mattered more than any of it. "Emma, Ben, your Grandpa Arthur loved you completely. He told me so, and he proved it in a way Grandma Diane can never undo. You are every bit as much his grandchildren as anyone at this table. He made sure you'd always know it. Don't you ever believe otherwise. Here is how it ended. Diane was exposed in the one currency she cared about, the good opinion of her family, gathered around her own Christmas table. She had stood up to perform her power and her bloodline purity. And instead, she'd been revealed as a woman so consumed by favoritism that her own husband had secretly protected his grandchildren from her, which told everyone in that room exactly what Arthur had privately concluded about the woman he'd married. You cannot recover, in front of your whole family, from the revelation that your late husband didn't trust you not to abuse the grandchildren. And Ashley, this was the part I didn't expect, Ashley was horrified. Genuinely. It turned out that Ashley, the mother of the golden grandchildren, had been made deeply uncomfortable by her mother's favoritism for years, and had never known how to stop it, and was mortified to have her own children used as instruments of my children's exclusion. Ashley stood up at that table and said, "Mom, this is grotesque. I never asked for this. Emma and Ben are my kids' cousins, and they are absolutely Whitmores, and I'm ashamed of what you just did." The golden branch refused the crown. Diane's whole framework, the worthy line versus the deluded one, collapsed the moment the worthy line rejected it. The trust stood, obviously. Arthur had built it to be unbreakable, and Diane's fury couldn't touch it. My children received, and will receive, their full equal share of their grandfather's fortune, protected forever. But that was never the part that mattered most. The part that mattered most was Emma and Ben learning, on the same day their grandmother tried to erase them, that their grandfather had loved them so completely, and seen the danger so clearly that he'd built them a fortress years in advance. Cruel woman told them they weren't real Whitmores, and in the same hour, they learned that the man who was the real heart of the Whitmore family had made certain, before he died, that they always would be. The wound and the healing arrived together. Diane and I have minimal contact now. She never apologized. She experienced the whole thing as a betrayal by Arthur and by Ashley and by me, rather than as a consequence of her own cruelty, which is how people like Diane experience everything. But she has no power over my children anymore, and everyone in the family knows what she tried to do, and she spends her days as a diminished matriarch, whose bloodline obsession cost her the respect she valued above all else. My kids are okay, better than okay. Their cousins, Ashley's kids, are close to them now. The artificial hierarchy between them dissolved once the adults stopped enforcing it. And Emma and Ben carry something I'm grateful for every day. The certain knowledge that their grandpa Arthur loved them without condition, proven not in words, but in a fortress of his own quiet making. My mother-in-law stood up at Christmas and told my children they weren't real Whitmores, that they'd been cut out, that their blood wasn't good enough. She didn't know that the man who actually built the Whitmore fortune had already answered her, years before, from beyond his own grave, that he'd looked at his wife's cold heart and his grandchildren's faces, and quietly decided that love, not Diane, would have the last word. It did.